In the grand theater of global politics, where the usual suspects, Western powers draped in old imperial robes, have long pulled the strings behind the scenes, a new star rises from an unexpected corner: Ibrahim Traoré. Not just another figurehead, but a disruptor who refuses to dance to the tune of the well-rehearsed script handed down by centuries of colonial hangovers and post-colonial puppet shows. Traoré's Africa is a narrative rewrite. It's not the Africa waiting patiently for aid packages wrapped in condescending smiles or for foreign powers to bless its progress with reluctant nods. No, this is an Africa that stands tall, chest out, with a gaze sharp enough to cut through decades of disguised exploitation and hollow diplomacy. Let's be clear, Traoré is not merely leading a country, he's orchestrating a seismic shift. His leadership sends a message that rattles the established order. We are done with your strings and your charity masquerading as support. Africa will chart its own course, with its own hands firmly on the wheel. Why does this scare the West? Because for decades, their influence thrived on a fragile balance of control, subtly enforced through economic dependencies, political pressure, and a never-ending carousel of friendly governments. Traoré's rise is a wrecking ball to that system. It threatens the cozy status quo where Africa's vast resources are siphoned off under the guise of partnership, while the continent remains sidelined. And this isn't just politics. It's a wake-up call wrapped in bold defiance and smart strategy. Traoré's refusal to bow to traditional power brokers is not reckless bravado. It's a calculated claim to dignity and sovereignty that many African leaders have only whispered about in private. In this video, we'll unpack what Traoré's model means for Africa and the world, from his historic refusals to strike deals that undermine his people's future, to his unyielding insistence that Africa must stand on its own 2 feet. Expect sharp wit, incisive commentary, and a narrative that challenges every comfortable assumption the West has about Africa. Because make no mistake, this is not a story about a continent waiting to be saved. This is a story about a continent demanding to be respected. A story about a leader who silences the noise of patronizing offers with a single sentence. And if you thought global politics was predictable, think again. The era of Africa as the world's geopolitical pawn is over. The new script has been written, and Traoré holds the pen. In the grand chessboard of global politics, African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are rewriting the rules, and the West isn't happy about it. Why? Because Traoré embodies a new breed of self-reliant leadership that shatters the long-standing narratives imposed by Western powers. This isn't just about a man or a country. It's about a tectonic shift challenging centuries of geopolitical control. For decades, the West has maintained its influence over Africa through a combination of economic dependence, political puppetry, and soft power. Aid packages came with strings attached. Loans were disguised as gifts but guaranteed lifelong debt. Trade agreements favored Western corporations while stifling local industries. African leaders who played along were rewarded with recognition, stability, and access to Western markets. Those who dared resist were swiftly labeled as rogue, unstable, or worse, targets for covert interventions. Enter Ibrahim Traoré, a man who refuses to dance to this tune. Traoré's approach is unapologetically bold, prioritizing national sovereignty, pushing for economic self-sufficiency, and demanding respect on the global stage. He doesn't just talk about independence, he acts on it, often in ways that leave Western diplomats scrambling to rewrite their playbooks. This self-reliance is a threat because it undermines the West's ability to project power indirectly. It challenges the aid dependency model that has long been a pillar of Western strategy in Africa. When African nations start developing their own industries, control their resources, and make foreign policy decisions free from external pressure, the West's traditional levers of influence weaken dramatically. Moreover, Traoré's defiance isn't limited to economic policies. His political rhetoric and actions symbolize a break from the post-colonial paradigm where African leadership was expected to align closely with Western interests. Traoré speaks not in whispers behind closed doors, but with a voice loud enough to echo across international media. A voice that says, Africa will no longer be a silent spectator in its own destiny. The West fears this because it reveals the fragility beneath the veneer of global dominance. The carefully maintained status quo, where power flows from the West to the rest, is at risk of unraveling. And this fear manifests not only in diplomatic tensions, but in covert operations, propaganda, and economic pressure designed to isolate leaders like Traoré. Yet the irony is palpable. The more the West attempts to suppress these self-reliant leaders, the more it fuels their popularity at home and abroad. To many Africans, Traoré is a symbol of pride and hope, proof that the continent can break free from its chains and define its own future. In this section, we start to see why Traoré's leadership isn't just a political inconvenience for the West. It's a systemic threat to their global hegemony. His rise forces us to question the legitimacy of the existing world order, where a handful of nations dictate terms to billions. As we peel back the layers, the question remains, can the West adapt to this new reality? Or will it double down on tactics that only deepen divisions and ignite resistance? Traoré's challenge is not just to his enemies abroad, but to a world that is slowly but surely awakening to the power of true independence. As soon as Ibrahim Traoré uttered that historic refusal, the Western media and their diplomatic puppeteers scrambled to recalibrate. Imagine expecting a tame, well-trained poodle, only to be met with a roaring lion. The West, so used to scripting Africa's roles in their geopolitical theater, suddenly faced an unscripted rebel, a leader who refused to dance to their tired tune. The headlines exploded like fireworks at Guy Fawkes Night. But instead of celebration, it was outrage dressed up in political correctness. Defiant, reckless, dangerous precedent. These were the words flung around like confetti, desperate attempts to frame Traoré's boldness as naivete, or worse, a threat to stability. The same stability that conveniently meant continued Western influence and control. Here's the sharp irony. When African leaders meekly comply, they are lauded as visionaries. When they say no, suddenly they're obstructionists or ungrateful. This double standard isn't just glaring. It's the punchline of a joke the West has been telling itself for decades. But the joke's on them now. Traoré's refusal wasn't just about rejecting a deal. It was a seismic shift in the narrative. It was a rejection of the archaic notion that Africa must always play second fiddle in global affairs. It was a brazen announcement that the era of polite submission is over. And let's be clear, that no echoed beyond Mali's borders. It reverberated across the continent and beyond, shaking the foundations of old empires still clinging to their fading shadows. Why does this matter? Because the West's power rests largely on the illusion of indispensability. The idea that African nations need their guidance, their aid, their benevolent oversight. Traoré shattered that illusion with one simple, powerful word: no. And nothing rattles a system more than a challenge it can't easily dismiss. The reaction from Western capitals was telling. Behind the polished statements and stern warnings was a gnawing fear. Not of instability in Africa, but of losing control over the narrative. If Traoré's refusal sparks a wave of self-reliant leadership, then the carefully maintained web of influence, spun through decades of aid, development, and partnership, could unravel faster than a cheap suit. And that's exactly why this moment is viral gold. It captures a turning point. Africa isn't waiting for permission anymore. It isn't begging for scraps from the geopolitical banquet. Instead, it's walking to the table with its own menu, and Traoré is leading the way. The West's predictable panic reveals their true fears, not about Africa's progress, but about their diminishing monopoly on power. They fear that the continent's rising leaders will no longer accept scripted roles written in foreign capitals. They fear that no will become the new normal, a political weapon wielded by those who refuse to be puppets. It's a potent reminder that true sovereignty means more than just holding office. It means daring to defy, to disrupt, and to demand respect on your own terms. Traoré's no isn't reckless, it's revolutionary. For a moment, imagine the discomfort in those lavish offices from London to Washington. A leader who won't play nice, who won't submit, who won't be bought or bullied. It's the nightmare scenario dressed as a political statement, and it's exactly the kind of boldness Africa needs. Let's drop a viral truth bomb here. The era of Africa needs saving is over. The era of Africa demands respect has begun. Traoré's defiance is a beacon for every leader tired of being a footnote in Western policy briefs. So when the pundits lament destabilization or risk, remind them that the real risk lies in clinging to colonial mindsets. The only true danger is continuing to treat Africa as a charity case rather than a powerhouse in its own right. In a world desperate for new power narratives, Traoré's refusal is the plot twist we all needed. It's a masterstroke of political courage, a vivid illustration that sometimes the sharpest diplomacy is a firm and unapologetic no. And to those still clinging to the past, brace yourselves. The new Africa won't be silent, it won't be subservient, and it certainly won't take orders anymore. When the world's most powerful nations play chess, they usually settle for pawns, knights, and maybe a queen or two. But then there's Ibrahim Traoré, a master tactician who doesn't just move pieces, he reinvents the game. While Washington, Moscow, and Beijing squabble like toddlers fighting over a toy, Traoré is quietly redrawing the rules with a smug grin that says, "Is that all you've got?" You see, the geopolitical arena isn't just a battlefield for armies and missiles. It's a stage for cunning minds who know that the pen, in the perfectly timed tweet, can be mightier than the sword. Traoré understands this better than anyone, turning Africa's long-neglected corners into hotspots of strategic influence that the old powers had once written off as irrelevant. You can't checkmate a king who refuses to sit at your board, Traoré seems to say. His leadership style is less about confrontation and more about quiet, devastating calculation. While the West projects its tired narratives of dependency and chaos onto Africa, Traoré flips the script. He's the grandmaster behind moves that are subtle yet seismic, dismantling decades of paternalistic geopolitics with a single, ruthless stroke. Take, for example, his deft handling of diplomatic relations. Instead of kowtowing to traditional power brokers, Traoré extends olive branches to unlikely allies, regional powers, emerging economies, and even adversaries sidelined by Western interests. It's a bold, almost cheeky strategy. Make friends out of former foes and leave your so-called friends wondering where the loyalty went. This is more than just strategy. It's a declaration of independence that resonates far beyond the dusty halls of Bamako. Traoré's moves signal to Africa and the world that the continent is no longer content to be the geopolitical playground of foreign powers. It's an awakening, and the sound is deafening. But here's where the real genius lies. Traoré doesn't just challenge the West's dominance in theory, he undermines it with style. While Western leaders drone on about democracy and stability, Traoré is busy building systems that suit African realities, not Western fantasies. He rejects the cookie-cutter models imposed by decades of external intervention, crafting instead a new paradigm that prioritizes sovereignty and self-reliance. It's like watching a game of poker where Traoré is the only player holding a royal flush, and he's not afraid to call the bluff of the so-called world leaders. His refusal to bow to pressure, whether economic sanctions or diplomatic isolation, sends a powerful message. Africa will no longer dance to the tune of foreign agendas. When the lion roars, the jackals scatter. Traoré's roar is one of conviction, defiance, and unmistakable power. His leadership embodies a new kind of diplomacy, one that embraces complexity, demands respect, and commands attention. It's a far cry from the scripted speeches and empty promises so often served up on the international stage. Moreover, Traoré's approach exposes the hypocrisy of global powers who claim to champion freedom and justice while perpetuating systems of inequality and exploitation. He calls out the double standards with a biting wit that leaves his critics tongue-tied and scrambling for answers. The beauty of Traoré's geopolitical dance is that it's not just about winning today's battles, but reshaping the entire game for future generations. His vision is unapologetically African, a bold testament to what the continent can achieve when it refuses to be boxed in by outdated narratives. For the UK audience watching this unfold, it's a wake-up call. The age of viewing Africa through a colonial lens is over. Traoré's moves on the geopolitical chessboard are a clear signal. Africa is rewriting its destiny, and the global powers would do well to pay attention before they find themselves outplayed. In the end, Traoré's story isn't just about one man or one nation. It's about the seismic shift in global power dynamics. It's about the end of an era where Africa was a mere pawn and the beginning of a new chapter where the continent claims its rightful place as a formidable player on the world stage. If you want peace, prepare for power. Traoré isn't just preparing, he's already there, and the world is watching, whether it's ready to admit it or not. In a world where the global chessboard is littered with pawns, masquerading as kings, Ibrahim Traoré plays not only as a grandmaster, but as a rule breaker, rewriting the entire playbook. Forget the tired scripts handed down by Western think tanks and former colonial powers. Traoré is busy drafting a new chapter in African sovereignty, one that makes old empires squirm in their air-conditioned boardrooms. Why does this matter? Because Traoré's strategic defiance isn't just about Mali or West Africa. It's a bold challenge to the status quo that has long kept the continent's narrative confined to headlines about poverty, conflict, and dependence. He's signaling a seismic shift, one that demands we reconsider how power is exercised and resisted on the world stage. Let's unpack this. First, Traoré's defiance is surgical, not reckless. Unlike the blustering tantrums of some world leaders who treat diplomacy like Twitter spats, Traoré's moves are calculated, purposeful, and rooted in a deep understanding of Africa's history and geopolitical realities. He knows that the real power lies in strategic patience, a long game played with precision rather than cheap theatrics. Take his refusal to bow to foreign pressure. When the West expects a docile partner eager to follow their agenda, Traoré instead wields sovereignty like a scalpel, cutting through decades of neo-colonial influence with measured but unmistakable strokes. This is no chaotic rebellion. It's a carefully choreographed dance that exposes the fragility of external interference. And here lies the first viral truth. Real power isn't shouted from the rooftops. It's whispered in the ears of those who dare to listen. Traoré embodies this truth, using subtle defiance to unsettle powers accustomed to puppet shows rather than strategic resistance. Second, Traoré's approach disrupts the West's favorite narratives. For too long, Africa has been portrayed as a continent perpetually waiting for salvation, whether from aid, foreign investment, or international peacekeepers. Traoré flips this script by asserting that Africa's future will be written by Africans on their own terms. His policies are a testament to this philosophy, prioritizing self-reliance, strengthening regional alliances, and investing in local capacity building are not just slogans, but pillars of his governance. This rejection of dependency is a slap in the face to decades of paternalistic policies disguised as help. To borrow another viral gem, when you break the chains of dependency, you don't just gain freedom, you rewrite the rules of the game. Third, Traoré's defiance isn't limited to rhetoric. His administration's actions send shockwaves across geopolitical circles. Whether it's realigning Mali's partnerships away from traditional Western allies toward more balanced global engagements, or asserting control over the country's natural resources, Traoré is turning sovereignty from a buzzword into a tangible force. This shift unnerves Western powers, exposing their discomfort with a narrative they can no longer control. Traoré's moves remind us that power isn't static. It's dynamic, shaped by those bold enough to claim it. His defiance is a clear message. The days when Africa was content to be the backdrop for global power plays are over. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Traoré's strategic defiance offers a blueprint for other African leaders, and indeed for anyone challenging entrenched power structures. It shows that true leadership requires courage to stand firm, vision to chart a new course, and wit to turn opposition into opportunity. In an era when many leaders cling to outdated paradigms, Traoré's rise is a beacon of hope and a call to action. His story is a reminder that the future belongs not to those who follow, but to those who dare to lead differently. To sum up with a viral punch, in a world addicted to control, the greatest act of rebellion is self-determination, and Traoré is its unapologetic architect. The West may scoff, foreign analysts may criticize, but history will remember Traoré as the man who dared to rewrite Africa's geopolitical script, not with fanfare, but with unyielding strategic defiance. When a lone African leader dares to rewrite the rules of the geopolitical game, the world doesn't just sit quietly, it trembles. Ibrahim Traoré's unapologetic defiance has sent shockwaves through the corridors of power from Washington to Brussels, and oh, how the West is struggling to keep a straight face. When Africa raises its voice, the old world quakes. This is no exaggeration. Traoré's stance isn't just a political statement. It's a cultural earthquake shaking the fragile foundations of Western hegemony. Imagine the discomfort in those diplomatic salons where power suits sip overpriced coffee and try to decode what self-reliance really means. Spoiler alert, it means no more puppets, no more guidance, and certainly no more handouts with strings attached. The West reaction? A mixture of baffled disbelief, thinly veiled panic, and a frantic scramble to maintain influence. They've sent their emissaries, experts, and yes, even the odd soft power influencer to Malian soil, all hoping to tame the uncontainable spirit of Traoré. But the irony is thick. Every attempt to engage only amplifies his standing at home and abroad. Let's be clear, this isn't just a clash of policies. It's a fundamental threat to the narrative the West has spun for decades, that African nations should remain grateful dependents, not audacious architects of their own destiny. Traoré's rise dares to ask the uncomfortable questions. Why should Africa continue to dance to a tune it never wrote? Who benefits from this perpetuated dependence? And most importantly, what if the old scripts no longer apply? This defiance has exposed the West's fragility like never before. Watch closely as the usual chorus of concerned international statements pour in, dripping with euphemisms and diplomatic doublespeak. Behind the polished rhetoric lies a stark truth. Traoré's example is contagious. Other leaders are watching, learning, and quietly cheering. The fear is real. What if the Traoré model ignites a continent-wide refusal to bow? And then comes the economic warfare, cloaked in sanctions and aid suspension. But these attempts to choke a rising force only reveal how desperate the West truly is. The logic is as outdated as the typewriter. Punish the bold, reward the compliant. Except in this modern game, Traoré is rewriting the playbook. He's not just surviving sanctions, he's pivoting, innovating, and building alliances that no one saw coming. Russia, China, even emerging regional powers now circle Mali's orbit, eager to embrace a leader unafraid to challenge Western dominance. The West's greatest fear is not Traoré's power. It's the idea of an Africa that governs itself without permission. It's a fear laced with hypocrisy. While preaching democracy and freedom, the West has historically tolerated, even supported, regimes that toe the line. Traoré's unapologetic assertion of sovereignty breaks this mold, shining a spotlight on the double standards that have defined international relations for decades. But here's the kicker. Traoré isn't just rattling cages. He's rewriting the rulebook on leadership. His bold moves echo beyond politics into the hearts of ordinary Africans who crave dignity and respect, not patronizing pity. He's become a symbol, a beacon for those tired of being seen as mere footnotes in global affairs. This dynamic has forced the West into a precarious dance, simultaneously trying to isolate Traoré while courting him, condemning his defiance while fearing to push too hard. It's a delicate balance of power, and for once, the West is playing catch-up. In short, Ibrahim Traoré's defiance has become the West's diplomatic nightmare, a challenge to centuries of assumed superiority, and a harbinger of a new world order where former colonies no longer wait for permission to lead. The question now isn't if Traoré will succeed, but how many others will follow. And in that unfolding story lies the real drama, the real tension, and the real hope for a reimagined global landscape. When the West fears your independence, you know you're doing something right. As the dust settles on this grand political theater, one thing is crystal clear. Ibrahim Traoré is not just a leader. He's a seismic force rewriting the rules of engagement for Africa and the world. The West's old playbook, filled with tired cliches about development aid and democracy promotion, lies in tatters, discarded like yesterday's news. Traoré's unapologetic defiance and razor-sharp intellect have thrown a wrench into the gears of global power, sparking a quiet panic among those clinging desperately to their fading influence. Here's the punchline that the West doesn't want to admit. You can't bully a lion into submission when it's already roaring louder than ever. Traoré embodies a new generation of African leadership, bold, self-reliant, and armed with a vision that mocks outdated dependency. His refusal to dance to the West tune is not mere stubbornness. It's a strategic masterclass in reclaiming sovereignty. The irony, while Western media continues to spin tales of chaos and instability in Africa, the reality on the ground is one of unprecedented resilience and innovation. Traoré's government is a beacon to those tired of the hand-me-down policies that serve foreign interests over local needs. It's no wonder the old guard shudders at the thought of this new Africa, an Africa that no longer whispers but roars. Let's be honest. Watching Traoré dismantle centuries of paternalistic narratives with a single sentence is the kind of political theater that leaves even the most seasoned diplomats slack-jawed. The man doesn't just break the script. He rewrites it in bold, unyielding strokes. His charisma and intellect combined form a cocktail so potent that it sends ripples through the corridors of power from Washington to Brussels. But what's truly remarkable is how Traoré's story resonates beyond the borders of his nation. His rise is a call to arms for oppressed peoples everywhere, a reminder that the era of external puppeteers is over. This is not just a political shift. It's a cultural revolution that challenges the very foundations of neocolonialism. As the West scrambles to find new tactics, Traoré stands firm, embodying the axiom that power respects power. His leadership style is a sharp rebuke to those who mistake submission for diplomacy. Instead, he wields his influence with precision, cutting through pretense and exposing the hypocrisy of global power dynamics. In this chess game of geopolitics, Traoré plays not just to defend his territory, but to checkmate an entire system built on exploitation. The stakes are high, and the West's discomfort is palpable. But it's a discomfort they brought upon themselves by underestimating the rise of self-reliant leadership in Africa. Here's a viral truth to remember. When Africa roars, the world listens. And those who ignored the warning are left scrambling for excuses. Traoré's story is far from over. It's just beginning. And for those watching closely, it's clear that this lion's roar will echo for generations to come. So as we close this chapter, remember this. The age of silent compliance is dead. Traoré's Africa is awake, unafraid, and unapologetically bold. The West may clutch its pearls, but history will remember who chose to stand tall and who chose to cling to a crumbling empire. And if you think this is just another story from a far-off continent, think again. This is a blueprint for the future, one where power is reclaimed, dignity restored, and a new narrative forged in the fire of resilience. The curtain falls, but the roar, that's just getting started.